The witness Gale Thorne had always preferred the company of growing things to people. His farm sat on the dusty edge of Nexus Colony, where the red soil stretched endlessly toward twin suns that painted everything amber at dusk. For 3 years, he'd cultivated his crops in peaceful isolation, the hum of his irrigation systems, the only sound besides wind through the grain stalks. That peace shattered when the military convoy rumbled past his property line, wiping sweat from his brow. Cale watched from behind his storage shed as 6 armored vehicles kicked up dust clouds. They weren't supposed to stop here. The main road to the colony center lay 5 kilometers north. At the lead transport ground to a halt near his eastern fence, followed by the others in formation. Soldiers emerged, their black uniforms stark against the golden landscape. Captain Voss, a man Cale recognized from colony briefings, barked orders while his men formed a perimeter. What held Cale's attention, though, was what they dragged from the rear transport. The alien was unlike anything in the colony's xenobiology databases. Her skin shimmered with an opalescent quality that shifted between silver and deep blue, and delicate ridges traced elegant patterns along her neck and temples. Despite heavy shackles around her wrists and ankles, she moved with fluid grace, until a soldier's shock rod sent her crashing to her knees. "Entertainment break," Captain Voss announced with a cruel smile. "Let's see what makes this one tick." Cale's stomach churned as the soldiers took turns with their shock rods, laughing at her. Pained gasps. She never screamed, never begged, just endured with a dignity that made their cruelty seem even more monstrous. Her large, luminous eyes met Cale's across the distance, and he saw not the savage beast the military claimed she was, but intelligence, sadness, and surprising compassion. The torture continued for 20 minutes before the convoy moved on, leaving the alien barely conscious in their transport. As the dust settled, Cale found himself trembling, not from fear, but from rage he thought he'd buried forever. He'd fled his past as a resistance fighter on the Outer Rim, sick of violence and death. But watching that display of casual cruelty awakened something he'd tried to kill. The skills were still there, dormant but intact. The knowledge of weak points in military equipment, guard rotations, comm frequencies. That night, Cale sat on his porch cleaning his old sniper rifle, a weapon he'd sworn never to touch again. The convoy would camp at Deadrock Canyon, 15 kilometers south standard protocol for prisoner transports. They'd have sentries, but canyon acoustics would mask his approach. He could tend his crops tomorrow, pretend nothing had changed. Or he could honor the promise he'd made to himself long ago. Never again would he stand by while innocence suffered dot as Nexus's twin moons rose full and bright. Cale Thorne made his choice. The farmer was about to remember how to be a soldier, and the galaxy would never be the same. The awakening canyon ambush had been almost too easy. 3 guards, predictable patrol patterns, outdated equipment. Cale moved through them like a ghost, muscle memory guiding his hands. By dawn, he was carrying the unconscious alien back to his farm. Her surprisingly light form cradled against his chest. Dr. Nira Solace arrived within the hour, her medical bag clutched tight as she hurried across Cale's threshold. The colony's only physician who still made house calls. She'd patched him up after bar fights and treated his seasonal allergies without judgment. Now her weathered face went pale at the sight of his patient. "Cale, what have you done?" she whispered. But her hands were already moving, checking pulse points along the alien's throat. "The right thing," he replied simply, watching Nira's gentle examination. "Can you help her?" "Her name is Zephyra," came a weak voice from the couch. Luminous eyes fluttered open, focusing on Cale with startling clarity. "And yes, Doctor, Solace can help. Your people's medical knowledge is more compatible with ours than you know." Nira's hands stilled. "You speak our language." "I speak 743 languages," Zephyr replied, attempting to sit up. Kale was beside her instantly, his hand steady against her back. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through him. It was necessary for my mission. Which was? Kale asked, settling beside her on the couch. This close, he could see the intricate patterns in her skin, shifting like living art. Peace. Zephyr's voice carried weight beyond its softness. Was an envoy to the Galactic Confederation. Your military intercepted my ship because my people's proposal threatened their expansion plans. Doctor, Solace worked quietly, applying regenerative gel to the worst of Zephyr's injuries. The Confederation's been dead for 50 years. Not dead. Sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake. Zephyr's hand found Kale's, her fingers longer and more delicate than human, but warm. My people have been gathering allies, species tired of your empire's brutality. I carried codes, contact frequencies, proof of war crimes. Kale felt something shift inside him, a recognition of purpose he'd lost years ago. They'll come looking. For you, yes. And when they realize you freed me, they'll come for you too. Zephyr's grip tightened on his hand. I'm sorry. You saved my life, and I've doomed yours. Maybe. Kale brought her hand to his lips, surprising himself with the gentle kiss he pressed to her knuckles. Or maybe you've given me a reason to. Lev again. The afternoon brought Sergeant Dex, one of Captain Voss's men, conducting a routine patrol that brought him uncomfortably close to Kale's property. Through the window, Kale watched the soldier's careful examination of tire tracks. Near his eastern fence. We need to leave, Zephyr murmured against his shoulder. They'd spent the day talking, sharing stories, her head gradually finding its way to rest against him. The connection between them felt both sudden and inevitable. No, Kale said firmly. We make our stand here, but first we make some calls. His old contacts were scattered across the outer rim, but the emergency frequencies still worked. By evening, responses began filtering in smugglers, medics, former resistance fighters who'd gone to ground. The network was dormant, not dead dot as Nexus's twin moons rose again. Kale held Zephyr close on his porch, her alien warmth against his side, feeling like the most natural thing in the galaxy. Tomorrow would bring danger, but tonight, for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. Thank you, she whispered against his neck, for rescuing you, for seeing me as someone worth rescuing. The network Jurek Steele's freighter touched down in Kale's north pasture 3 days later, landing thrusters scorching furrows in the grain. The smuggler emerged with his characteristic swagger, but his eyes were serious as he surveyed the farm's new defenses. Never thought I'd see Kale Thorne digging foxholes again, Jurek called out, shouldering his pack. Behind him, Myra cross-thin, nervous, brilliant with communications equipment, hurried to keep up. Never thought I'd need to, Kale replied, embracing his old friend. The past days had transformed his peaceful farm into something resembling a fortress. Motion sensors dotted the perimeter, and weapon caches lay hidden beneath grain storage bins. Cephyr emerged from the farmhouse, her recovery remarkable. The opalescent patterns in her skin had brightened, and she moved with renewed grace. She'd taken to wearing Kale's old shirts, the fabric hanging loose on her slighter frame in a way that made his pulse quicken. So this is our interstellar diplomat, Jurek said, offering a respectful bow. Heard you've got half the Imperial fleet looking for you. More than half, Myra added, setting up her equipment array. I've been monitoring military frequencies. They've classified this as a Priority 1 retrieval. Captain Voss has been given unlimited resources. That evening, as Myra worked to establish secure communication channels, Kale found Zephyr in his garden. She knelt among the vegetable rows, her hands glowing with a soft bioluminescence as she touched wilting plants. Under her ministrations, leaves unfurled and stems straightened. "Your world is beautiful," she said without looking up. "My people have legends about places like this world's, where life grows wild and free." Kale knelt beside her, watching her work. "Where is your world?" "Gone." Her glow dimmed. "The Empire strip-mined it for rare minerals 20 years ago. My people scattered to refugee ships, keeping our culture alive in cramped corridors, and recycled. I'm sorry." Kale's hand covered hers, their fingers intertwining. "Don't be sorry. Be angry." Zephyra turned to face him, her eyes intense. "Anger can be transformed into action. Yours already has." Their lips met in the dying light, a kiss that tasted of starlight and growing things. She was different from any human woman, skin warm, but with an underlying coolness, her scent like ozone after rain, but she felt perfect in his arms. "The first transport arrives tomorrow," Mira announced from the porch, breaking the moment. 16 volunteers from the Corellan Sector DR. Solace has agreed to house them in the old mining complex. Jorik appeared beside her, grinning. "And I've got 3 more ships inbound." Word spreading fast the Empire made a mistake going after a diplomat. Lots of people remember what that used to mean. That night, Kale and Zephyra lay entwined in his bed, her head on his chest as they listened to encrypted transmissions from across the galaxy. Species he'd never heard of pledging support, former Imperial citizens offering intelligence, entire colonies quietly declaring neutrality. "This is bigger than either of us imagined," Zephyra whispered, tracing patterns on his skin. "Are you afraid?" Kale asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "But not of dying. Of failing. My people have waited so long for hope." Kale tilted her chin up, meeting her luminous gaze. "Then we don't fail." Outside, the first of many ships began descending through Nexus's atmosphere, and Kale Thorne's farm became the birthplace of a revolution. In his arms, the woman who'd started it all pressed closer, and he knew there was no going back. The seeds had been planted. Now they would see what grew. The Hunt Commander Blackwood arrived with the dawn, his battlecruiser Eclipse casting shadows across the colony. Kale watched through binoculars as dropships deployed in coordinated patterns, professional, methodical. Overwhelming. Beside him in the command bunker, Zephora monitored communication channels, while Mira coordinated their scattered allies. 87 Imperial Marines, Thess Wild reported, sliding into the bunker. The former Colonial Guard had been among the first to answer Kale's call, bringing 15 volunteers and intimate knowledge of local terrain. Heavy weapons, full battle armor. They're not taking prisoners this time. Kale studied the tactical display Myra had cobbled together. Red dots marked Imperial positions, while green showed their own forces, barely 30 fighters spread across 3 defensive positions. The abandoned mining complex held most of their volunteers, while Jorik's smugglers maintained escape routes through the canyon systems. "They know we're here," Zephyra said quietly, her bioluminescent patterns dim with stress. "Blackwood's reputation. He doesn't leave loose ends." The past week had seen remarkable changes. Refugees from a dozen worlds had found their way to Nexus, turning Kale's farm into a hub of resistance activity. The old mining tunnels now housed a field hospital, weapons depot, and communications center. But success had drawn attention, and now the reckoning had come. "We could run," Myra suggested, fingers dancing over her keyboards. "I've got extraction routes mapped, safe houses on 3 different worlds." "No," Kale's voice carried absolute certainty. "Running just delays the inevitable. Blackwood will hunt us across the galaxy. Better to face him here, on ground we know." The first attack came at noon, probing assaults against their outer perimeters. Kale's people held their positions, but the Imperial forces were testing defenses, mapping responses. Blackwood was taking no chances. "He's afraid," Zephyra observed, watching enemy movements through the scope of Kale's old sniper rifle. She'd proven surprisingly adept with human weapons. Afraid of what we represent. Should be, Tess muttered, checking her ammunition. Every species in 3 sectors is watching this. If we bloody his nose, the rebellion spreads. That afternoon brought the real assault. Marines advanced under covering fire from hover tanks, while air support strafed their positions. A mining complex took heavy damage, forcing Dr. Solace to evacuate, wounded deeper into the tunnel systems. In the chaos of battle, Kale found himself separated from the main group, pinned down in a grain storage facility with Zephyra and 3 volunteers. Imperial Marines surrounded the building, shock grenades rattling the walls. "There's a way out through the irrigation tunnels," Kale shouted over the noise. "Take the others and go." "Not without you," Zephyra replied, her weapon tracking movement outside the windows. "This isn't negotiable. You're too important." "To who?" Her eyes blazed as she spun to face him. "To the rebellion? To the cause? What about to you?" The question hung between them as explosions shook dust from the rafters. Outside, Commander Blackwood's voice echoed through speakers, offering clemency for surrender. "You're everything to me," Kale said simply, "which is why you have to survive this." Zephyra crossed to him in 2 quick strides, her hands framing his face. "Then we survive it together. That's what love means, facing the darkness as one." Their kiss was fierce, desperate, interrupted by the sound of breaching charges. Imperial Marines poured through smoke-filled doorways, but found only empty rooms and an irrigation grate hanging open. Hours later, regrouping in the deeper tunnels, Kale held Zephyra close as reports filtered in. They'd hurt the Imperials badly. 20 Marines down, 2 tanks destroyed, but at terrible cost. Half their volunteers were casualties, and their defensive positions were compromised. "Blackwood will regroup and hit us again," Tess reported, her arm in a sling. But Jorik got the civilian evacuation ships away. "Whatever happens next, our people are safe." In the darkness of the tunnels, surrounded by the wounded and desperate, Kale made peace with his choices. They might not survive the next assault, but they'd lit a fire that would spread across the stars, and he wouldn't face the end alone. The spark ignites the counterattack came at dawn, but not from where Blackwood expected. Overnight, 3 more ships had slipped through the Imperial blockade, not smugglers or volunteers, but Zephyra's people. Sleek vessels that moved like living things, crewed by beings whose bioluminescent patterns pulsed in complex communication patterns. "My cousin Thane leads the first ship," Zephyra explained, as they watched the alien craft engage Blackwood's fighters. "When your transmissions reached our refugee fleet, they couldn't ignore the call. The battle above transformed everything." Imperial forces found themselves caught between Kale's ground positions and alien ships that seemed to anticipate their every move. Commander Blackwood's confident assault became a desperate fighting retreat. "He's pulling back to the colony center," Bearer reported, her equipment jury-rigged but functional, "trying to use civilians as human shields." Kale felt the familiar cold clarity of combat decisions. "Tess, take half our people and secure evacuation routes for the colonists. Jorik, get those wounded to the medical ships. Everyone else, we're ending this." The chase through Nexus Colony's streets felt surreal. Imperial Marines fell back through residential districts, while colonists watched from windows, some throwing open doors to offer sanctuary to the rebels. The propaganda machine had painted them as terrorists. But seeing Kale's mixed-species fighters treating civilians with obvious care told a different story. The final confrontation came at the colonies' administrative center, where Blackwood had barricaded himself with his remaining forces. The building's shield generators hummed ominously, designed to withstand orbital bombardment. Those shields will hold against anything we've got. Tess observed. Zephyra stepped forward, her skin bright with purpose. Not against this, she produced. A small device from her packed crystalline, beautiful, clearly alien technology. A harmonic disruptor. It's designed to resonate with Imperial shield frequencies. You've been carrying that this whole time? Kale asked. I never intended to use it. It's a weapon of last resort, something my people developed in desperation. She looked up at him, luminous eyes reflecting the weight of history. But watching you fight, seeing what you've built here, some things are worth the risk. The disruptors. Activation sent visible waves through the air, and Blackwood's shields collapsed in a cascade of sparks. The final assault lasted mere minutes. Imperial Marines, demoralized and outnumbered, surrendered rather than face certain death. Commander Blackwood himself stood defiant in his command center, hands raised with eyes blazing with fury. Doomed this colony, he snarled at Kale. The Empire will send a fleet, burn this world to ash. Let them come, Zephyra replied, moving to stand beside Kale. They'll find more than one world waiting for them. Through the center's communications array, Mira was already broadcasting their victory across Imperial networks. Images of humans and aliens fighting side by side, of civilians celebrating in the streets, of Commander Blackwood's surrender. Within hours, similar uprisings began on worlds throughout the Outer Rim. 3 months later, Kale stood in the same grain fields where he'd first witnessed Zephyra's torture. The crops had been trampled during the battle, but new growth was already pushing through the red soil. Nexus had become the unofficial capital of what historians would call the Second Galactic Confederation, its farmlands hosting diplomatic meetings between species that had been enemies for generations. Any regrets? Zephyra asked, joining him. Among the growing stalks. Her skin patterns had stabilized into new configurations, joy markers his alien language lessons had taught him. About giving up the quiet life? Kale considered the question as transport ships crossed overhead, carrying representatives from 100 worlds. No, this is better. She pressed against his side, her warmth familiar now, essential. Even with the Empire's retaliation fleet, only 6 months out? Especially then, Kale's arm tightened around her. I spent years running from who I was supposed to be. Now I know we were supposed to find each other, supposed to light this spark. Their wedding had been a week ago, performed according to the traditions of both their species under Nexus's twin moons. Representatives from across the galaxy had attended, celebrating not just their union, but what it symbolized. Hope for a future where differences were strengths, rather than divisions. The children will grow up in a galaxy we can barely imagine, Zephyra murmured, her hand moving to her still flat stomach, where new life was already beginning. Kale knelt among his crops, pressing his ear to the soil as he had as a young farmer. Beneath the surface, he could hear it, the sound of growing things, of life finding its way despite all obstacles. The seeds of rebellion had taken root, and their harvest would feed the stars. In the distance, another transport descended, carrying more allies, more hope. The farmer who had wanted only peace had become the gardener of revolution, and the galaxy would bloom because of it.